Welcome, everybody, to the Brody File. We're glad you're with us this week. I'm Jennifer Wishon, a.k.a. Jenny in the B Block, who is in all the blocks this week because David is recovering from being in Iowa for 2 straight weeks. Unlike Donald Trump, we do not believe he's going to buy a farm, but we can confirm that he's looking into buying all the Taco Bell restaurants in the Hawkeye state. Well, the Iowa caucus results are in the books, and Ted Cruz came out the big winner. He can thank evangelicals who turned out in record number, the most ever in an Iowa caucus. The Cruz ground game was superb. A recap now from Heather Sells.
Compared to 2012, 60,000 more Iowans showed up for the GOP caucuses this year, and 2/3 were evangelical. That clearly helped Senator Ted Cruz, who edged past rivals Donald Trump and Marco Rubio for the victory.
Tonight is a victory for courageous conservatives across Iowa and all across this great nation.
He just had a message that really resonated, I think, with the people of Iowa, constitutional conservatism.
I think people see his integrity. They see he's true and real. He's a real person. He's not just some politician up there.
The caucuses delivered second place to Donald Trump, who responded with uncharacteristic modesty.
We finished second, and I want to tell you something. I'm just honored. I'm really honored.
And they validated the campaign of Marco Rubio, finishing with a strong third place, just 1 percentage point behind Trump.
Tonight we have taken the first step, but an important step, towards winning this election.
Notably, the caucuses delivered a final blow to former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, who called it quits. On the Democratic side, Iowans delivered the closest results ever in their state Democratic caucus history, with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders finishing in a virtual dead heat. The neck-and-neck results were a disappointment for Clinton, who had hoped for a clear victory, and brought back memories of her 2008 loss in Iowa to Barack Obama. But she promised to keep fighting.
I am excited about really getting into the debate with Senator Sanders about the best way forward to fight for us and America.
The people of Iowa have sent a very profound message to the political establishment.
For both parties, that anti-establishment message cannot be ignored. And neither can the New Hampshire primary, just 7 days away. Conventional wisdom says it may provide friendlier territory for Sanders and Trump, but this, of course, is anything but a conventional year.
That was Heather Sells reporting. There's so much to unpack here, but let's start with this. Ted Cruz is not like Mike Huckabee or Rick Santorum. Those 2 gentlemen won the last 2 caucuses. But when they came out of Iowa, they really didn't have much money or organization to do any more damage. Cruz, however, has plenty of cash and a campaign that is a well-oiled machine. Plus, his T-evangelical message, to coin a phrase from David, seems to be resonating.
Let me first of all say, to God be the glory. Tonight is a victory for the grassroots. Tonight is a victory for courageous conservatives across Iowa and all across this great nation.
Now, as for Trump, you would think he would hate second place, and trust me, it's not sitting well. But he actually overperformed in Iowa overall, since no one gave him much of a chance to do well in evangelical-heavy Iowa. Our Brody File crew was on hand to talk to some of Trump's disappointed supporters.
I thought it was pretty much what was to be expected. Donald's a great guy. I think he's going to do really well in the primaries from here on out. Iowa is a very evangelical state, which is a great thing. I'm a Christian. I think a lot of voters connect with Ted Cruz and Rubio more because, they're very much more. They talk more about, how they have a relationship with Jesus Christ and God, and Donald doesn't do that as much. And I think Donald has a relationship with God. I just don't think he talks about it much, and I don't think it's as much of his stump speech. And so I think Iowans relate to more to Cruz and to Rubio. But I really think that this is a great showing for Donald, and I think he's going to do fine in the rest of the country.
So you're with him all the way?
I'm with him all the way.
Now, this would be the part of the show where David would burst into a Brody File commentary, but since he's nowhere to be found, we decided to import him into the show via TV Magic. He discussed the Iowa caucus results this past week on the 700 Club.
We've had with us our political correspondent, David Brody. He's gaining quite a lot of stature for his analysis of the evangelicals. And David, it's good to have you with us today. What's your take on these results out of Iowa?
Well, first of all, Pat, let me just say I carry a bottle of Excedrin with me at all times during this campaign. It's been one of those campaigns for sure. Look, I think the bottom line here on all of this is that Ted Cruz had a phenomenal ground game, and he started this early, often. He was mobilizing pastors. He had precinct captains. He has $18 million now to go on to New Hampshire and other places. He's got a lot of money. He is not Huckabee. He is not Santorum because he's got money to back it up going forward, and what he did in Iowa was because of the money that was coming in. And so this is a clear victory for Ted Cruz. Then the question really becomes what happens to Donald Trump and Marco Rubio going forward. I have to tell you, Iowa has scrambled this whole thing. This thing is wide open. I mean, Ted Cruz can claim victory for sure. Marco Rubio can also, in a way, claim victory for doing so well, almost second place in Iowa here and coming on strong. And then Donald Trump, let's be honest with Donald Trump. Whoever thought Donald Trump would even be in the race, be in this Iowa race to begin with, let alone come in second in evangelical-heavy Iowa. And then he's polling very well in New Hampshire. So, boy, we've got a race on our hands, Pat.
Did you talk to his people about whether it was a mistake to pull out of the Iowa debate? What did they tell you?
Well, they're not going to say it's a mistake at all. Having said that, Ted Cruz's campaign has some internal polling suggesting that indeed it was a mistake. Not a huge blunder, but something that hurt at the margins. And if you actually look inside some of those internal polling numbers, not internal, I should say exit polls, most of the folks that were voting at the last moment, those ones that hadn't made up their mind, were actually going for Marco Rubio and then Ted Cruz. They were not going for Donald Trump. So he needed to be in that debate. I don't think there's any question about it. So it hurt him at the margins. For sure, Pat.
All right, when the Brody File comes back, Ted Cruz, one-on-one. We're back in a moment. Welcome back to the Brody File. We haven't officially calculated it, but we're pretty sure Ted Cruz has the most Brody File interviews of any other candidate this presidential cycle. Yes, even more FaceTime than David Brody. Well, maybe not that much FaceTime. Our last Brody File interview with him was just a few days before the Iowa caucus. It took place in Des Moines, Iowa, where David and the crew sat down with the senator. Have a look at what he was saying before his big victory.
Senator Cruz, let me ask you, what specifically do you need to do to beat Donald Trump here in Iowa?
Well, David, I'm tremendously encouraged. As you and I are sitting down here right now, we're 167 hours out from the Iowa caucuses. Monday night. Next Monday, the Iowa caucuses will decide. We've had a year of a wild roller coaster of never-ending attacks, of smoke and fire and fireworks. But now it just comes down to the people of Iowa. It comes down to the grassroots. And it's become really a two-man race between me and Donald. And it's right now neck and neck. It really comes down to turnout. Who shows up next Monday? And I think it presents to the people of Iowa a very clear choice. If they want a candidate with a proven record, someone who has stood and fought for the principles and issues and values that we share, whether life, whether marriage, whether religious liberty, whether fighting to stop Obamacare, fighting to stop amnesty, fighting to defend the Second Amendment, fighting to stand up to Iran and radical Islamic terrorism. And I'll tell you, I could not be more encouraged, because we're seeing two things happening. One, we're seeing the Washington establishment very much rallying around Donald Trump. It's a remarkable development. 3 weeks ago, nobody would have believed it's possible. But what's happening, the Washington establishment is leaving Marco Rubio. They've determined they don't think Marco can win. And they're rushing to Donald. And at the same time, what we're seeing conservatives uniting behind our campaign. And it's tremendously encouraging, because if conservatives unite, if conservatives show up and vote next Monday in the Iowa caucuses, we'll win.
Look, I want to ask you about this evangelical support for Donald Trump. Is it a scratch your head moment? Does it dumbfound you at all? What is your take on this exactly?
Listen, at the end of the day, what we are seeing is voters in Iowa making a determination on the ground. I don't believe anyone's going to win Iowa from a TV studio in Manhattan or a TV studio in D.C. Iowa's going to be won on the ground. You know, we're wrapping up what's called the Full Grass League, going to 99 counties, all 99 counties in Iowa, standing in front of the men and women of Iowa and answering their questions. It takes a humility to submit yourself to the voters and to ask for their support, to go to VFW halls, to go to pizza ranches, to go to people's living rooms and take the hard questions. That's the Iowa way.
Ted Cruz on the Brody File. Coming up next, like father, like son, a closer look at Rafael Cruz, Ted's fire and brimstone pastor-father. Back in a moment. And welcome back to the Brody File. One of the big reasons Ted Cruz won Iowa is because he did so well with evangelicals. He can thank a lot of his campaign team for having such a robust get-out-the-vote operation, but there's one person who he needs to give an extra special hug to. His father, Rafael Cruz. Rafael is a traveling preacher in his late 70s who took it upon himself to mobilize pastors all over the country for his son. It's a remarkable story and one you'll only hear about on the Brody File. David sat down with him a few months ago and has more.
Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign will likely be marked by his signature fiery rhetoric.
Just a few months ago, Jimmy Carter criticized this president for being weak on foreign policy. Holy cow!
Could it be that he gets that passionate streak from his father? This is 76-year-old pastor Rafael Cruz in action.
The Obama administration has both hands in your pocket.
It seems to be a classic like father, like son scenario. Two generations of passionate Christians who overcame huge odds. The son, an almost unknown candidate becoming a U.S. Senator, thanks in part to a father who had it even tougher. Born in Cuba, young Rafael faced prison and torture fighting against the brutal Batista dictatorship. After his release, he convinced the government to allow him to leave Cuba for America on a college scholarship. He left with only $100 sewn into his underwear by his mother.
My speaking ability was limited to maybe Tom is a boy, Mary is a girl. That was about it.
Ted marvels at his dad's life story.
My dad has been my hero my whole life. But what I've always found most extraordinary about his story is how commonplace it is.
And so in the late 1950s, here in America, his father worked hard by washing dishes, began a family, and most importantly, he got saved. Rafael became involved with the Religious Roundtable organization, mobilizing Christians to elect Ronald Reagan. Young Ted took it all in.
Our conversation around the dinner table centered on politics, as to why we had to get rid of this leftist progressive called Jimmy Carter. Ted got a dose of conservative politics from a biblical worldview on a daily basis for a whole year when he was 9 years old.
Father and son eventually set out on separate paths towards one goal, promoting Judeo-Christian principles while fusing both faith and politics.
Very, very clearly the Bible tells you who to vote for.
Jesus said that we're to be light in the world. We're to be salt in the earth. Well, that means that we need to bring that light. We need to be part of every aspect of society.
And for Rafael, that includes politics, by speaking out boldly on the issues of the day.
Let me ask you, David, aren't you sick and tired of men and women of lies in government? I mean, they tell you one lie to cover up the previous lie. Whether it is Fast and Furious, or Benghazi, or the IRS, or the NSA, or Ebola, or the missing emails, is lies upon lies upon lies.
Rafael Cruz knows his comments and sermons will likely attract media attention. He's been especially critical of President Obama.
Governing by decree, by executive order, just like a dictator like Fidel Castro.
Are you ready for the scrutiny? Because you are a traveling preacher, if you will, and you speak boldly and you speak the truth about Jesus, but a lot of people can't handle that.
What are we to do? Jesus said, you don't take a light and you hide it under a bushel. You put it on a lampstand. We have to expose the truth. And those who don't adhere to the truth are going to react against the truth. That is only natural.
Yeah.
So I would say I get energized. I mean, if we had no one criticizing what we're saying, perhaps we're not making an impact.
And the father wants to make his impact with pastors by trying to get them engaged in the cultural, social, and political issues of the day.
I tell pastors, stop looking at their rhetoric and start looking at their record. They all have a record. Jesus said, ye shall know them by their fruit. It's time we do some fruit checking.
Such a great story and quite a special man. All right, when we come back, we go back in time to when the Brody File first met Ted Cruz. A blast from the past, complete with the kiddies and the wife. Next. Welcome back to the Brody File. As you can see, we're devoting most of this show to Ted Cruz. That's what happens when you win the Iowa caucus. Who knows, maybe next week it will be a Donald Trump show if he wins New Hampshire. For now, though, we're going back in time to January of 2011. The Brody File crew did our first interview with Cruz at his home in Houston. The crew showed up and got the kids, his wife Heidi, and yes, Ted too. A more personal look now at the family and how Cruz became a U.S. Senator.
Daddy, want the money?
I got some money.
This is what truly drives Ted Cruz. Time at home with his wife and daughters in Houston, away from Washington's hustle and bustle.
Diligence, working hard to accomplish a task. Proverbs 22:29 tells us.
Family devotions take priority for the Cruz family, although Daddy faces pretty important work when Mr. Cruz goes to Washington.
They will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
In the 2 months since Ted Cruz descended on Washington, he's blazed a pretty remarkable path.
First, thanks be to God. To him be the glory.
Despite a resume that includes Harvard Law School, Cruz started as a political unknown, registering just 2% in the polls. Tea Party backing and a strong message, however, led to a primary win against the GOP lieutenant governor and powered him to the Senate.
It really was breathtaking, and it was a testament to the grassroots. It was a testament to what we the people can do standing together.
The Cruz family is used to overcoming long odds. His Cuban father arrived in the States at age 18, speaking no English with only $100 to his name. He went from his first job as a dishwasher to regularly working 7 days a week and eventually put himself through college. Now, after decades in business, his father travels as a Baptist pastor.
My dad has been my hero my whole life. But what I've always found most extraordinary about his story is how commonplace it is.
Cruz's career follows an upbringing filled with political discussion around the family table. He even memorized the U.S. Constitution as a super smart high schooler.
I gave probably 80 speeches all over the state on free market economics and the Constitution. And it became really my passion.
In college, Cruz began to connect the Constitution with his Christian faith. His mentor, Princeton professor and conservative Christian Robbie George, helped him embrace the concept of natural law.
Life, liberty, and property, the fundamental natural rights of man, are given to every one of us by God. And the role of government fundamentally is to protect those rights.
That philosophy became central to Cruz's political core.
The left is using the courts of law to tear down our faith.
Cruz, a Southern Baptist, doesn't shy away from talking about his faith.
At the end of the day, faith is not organized religion. It's not going to a church. It is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior.
But he's determined not to use it as a weapon.
I think anyone in politics, you've got a special obligation to avoid being a Pharisee, to avoid ostentatiously wrapping yourself in your faith.
Instead, Cruz has taken strong stands against increasing the debt ceiling, John Kerry as Secretary of State, and faced criticism for grilling Defense Secretary nominee Chuck Hagel.
We do not know, for example, if he received compensation for giving paid speeches at extreme or radical groups.
Senator Cruz has gone over the line. He basically has impugned the patriotism of the nominee
But conservatives applaud his approach. National Review ran the headline, "First Class Cruz, the next great conservative hope." Former Bush strategist Mark McKinnon has called him the Republican Barack Obama. Look, they're calling you a GOP rock star. What do you think?
I try to pay very little attention to the media. It is, as you know, a fickle creature.
For now, Cruz says he's focused on the job at hand, and that includes a new Republican Party.
I think President Obama is the most radical president we've ever seen. But I think an awful lot of Republicans failed to stand for principle and contributed to getting us in this mess.
You have a dolly bed. Let's go get your dolly bed, okay?
Heidi Cruz knows her husband will stand for principle, and she learned something else about him during that uphill battle for the Senate.
He only got better and better as things got tougher and tougher. And that gave voters and certainly us as his family just a lot of confidence that he's pretty good.
A calm and a strength in the storm is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that assessment is always true around the dinner table.
But it sure is true in national politics.
We're back in a moment. Finally, before we leave you, we want to share a fun little piece of video. So the Brody File crew was in the Des Moines airport, and well, you see a lot of politicians go through that airport around this big political season. Well, we saw Sarah Palin. She was actually talking to young journalists from an organization called Kid Unity. They go around and cover political events. She was holding court with them right there in the airport, just like a kiddie press gaggle. Then she saw us, and well, she had to come over and say hi.
Let me say you want me to come over? I will say hello to you. How are you? Good. Hi. We'll do something like this.
Governor.
I'll see you.
Governor, how much is it?
By the way, we believe that was Sarah Palin, but then again, it may have been Tina Fey from Saturday Night Live. Who knows? Well, that does it for this week's Brody File show. I'm Jennifer Wishon. Thanks so much for joining us. David is back next week after the big New Hampshire primary. Until then, we hope you have a great week. God bless.